I'm abstinent. I weigh and measure 3 meals a day from the clarified gray sheet, nothing in between but black coffee, tea, or approved liquids. And my abstinence date is July 24th, 1977. I see a lot of old friends here today, some of whom I haven't seen in over 20 years, and some new ones as well. Thanks for asking me to speak today. I got abstinent in July of 1977. When the Cambridge Gray Sheet Group, the original Cambridge Gray Sheet Group was first starting. And I'd been having trouble. I was 32 years old, and I'd been having trouble with food ever since I was a little girl. There was a lot of addiction in the family, but not alcoholism in the immediate family, but definitely compulsive eating and various kinds of self-abuse. My family specialized in and abusing everyone else and abusing themselves as well. To the extent where finally, years before I got abstinent, when I left my hometown of Ellenville, New York, which is a little town in what's called the Catskill Mountains, about an hour and a half north of New York City. By the time I left there, in my first of many geographical cures, I was really glad to shut the door on my childhood, and to some extent on my family as well. I really had to get away from my family in order to get well. I had from age 12 or 13 bulimia, although nobody was calling it bulimia then, but I was binging and purging, and obesity, because for most of that time between age 12 and 13 and age 32, when I got abstinent, I was very substantially overweight, finally somewhere around 183, 185 pounds. I'm only 4'11", so that was a lot of weight to carry. Today I weigh 111 pounds. So I lost a good deal of my body weight by being abstinent a day at a time. I was also hurting myself in other ways, including drinking alcoholically and taking a lot of pills, downers, sedatives, tranquilizers. My mother and father were quite punitive and very disapproving. I've just been thinking about it lately because I just in the last 2 weeks read every single one of the Margaret Strout novels, and she talks a lot about family and recollections of childhood and how they infect your adult life and what comes back to you as you experience your daily life. So I tried a lot of things before I got abstinent, starting around age 12 or 13 with appetite cutters. And by 13 or 14, I was wearing girdles to go and babysit the neighbors' kids. And then in my teenage years, it was lots of magazine diets where you could eat lots of something as long as you didn't eat certain other things. And then it was some real miracle diets that I thought for sure are going to work for me, like the AYDS diet, where you bought, well, I don't know if you're supposed to buy cases of them, but that's what I did. They were candies, actually. They were candies, brown candies that looked like you know what. And you were supposed to have one before a meal with a hot drink. And that, you know, the whole idea was this big empty space inside you, which could be filled up with something. So in this case, it was supposed to be this little thing that would swell. And I think I threw away 3 cases of those when I finally got abstinent. And then finally in a therapy group a few years before I got abstinent, I met this girl who was in OA, who was a little shorty like me, and she was quite small. And she told me that the reason she was so small was not because she was in OA, but because she was drinking Epicac after her binges. So then I started with the Epicac. I was teaching high school at the time. I'd been teaching high school for, I think, 3 years when I got abstinent. And the littlest thing stressed me out completely. Like the most stressful thing in my life right then was the English department meeting on Tuesdays at 3 o'clock. Now, when I think about it now, it was like, that was like the smallest broken shoelace. The moron who was the chairman of the department then, well, he was extremely reactionary, anti-Semitic, I'm Jewish, chauvinistic, I'm a feminist, extremely conservative. I come from the other end of the spectrum politically. But anyway, I used to take like 2-3 Valiums before I went to this meeting. And then I would come home and I would go to the drugstore and buy Epicac. And I would go to the grocery store next door and buy binge food and go home and do one and the other and do one and then the other. My alcoholism was usually at bay when I was very obese, but on various diets. As soon as I started to lose weight, then I would start with the alcohol instead. And God. All right. So I'm going to cut to the chase here because I could tell you a lot of stories in the last 44 plus years. So I'll just hit the high points here and say that it was an absolute miracle that I got abstinent, because I found some people who would a few months after I found them start the Saturday morning meeting in Cambridge. And the whole idea was to surrender. Surrender was a word that was not in my vocabulary or the vocabulary of anyone in my family. And I suspect not in my ancestors' vocabulary either. I come from an extremely defiant family. My mother was still on anti-nuke marches when she was 84. My father was a total rageaholic. In fact, to the extent where I got a phone call yesterday from a high school friend I haven't seen in 52 years. And the first thing he mentioned was my crazy father that he still remembers. So despite all that, I was desperate at that point. I was losing my hair from what I now know as bulimia. My teeth were loose from what I now know as bulimia. I weighed about 183, maybe 185 pounds. I was really angry. I was having a very hard time in my job because, well, you know, one of the reasons I was having a hard time in my job is because I was an active alcoholic and compulsive eater. And I was also having a hard time in my job because I put myself into you know, it was like that first, my teaching job, it was like I had size 18 shoes and I was trying to wear size 2 high heels for the 34 years that I taught there. So I was surrounded by people pleasers. I was surrounded in my job by active addicts. But what I learned in my early absence, my early sobriety, is that if you have difficulty in a situation, that the first thing to do is to look at your own behavior and what you can do about your own behavior to improve the situation. And then also there was a lot of advice in the early days of my gray sheet abstinence, just before and during that, when that first meeting started. There was a lot of advice like, you know, put on your bedroom slippers, you don't need a fancy job, you just need to be able to pay the bills. I thought that was crap 44 years ago, I still do. It's like what I decided was that whether I was waitressing, which I did plenty of in the Catskill Mountains during college and immediately after college in my early years of teaching, whether I was waitressing or taking care of other people's babies or teaching high school, I was going to have problems because I was not one to surrender. I was not one to shut my mouth. I was not good with groups. I was pretty feral. So I decided in that job to do the best I could with what I had. I had a few talents there. I love teaching. In some ways, I love teaching. And I loved to, and I was an English teacher, and I loved especially teaching writing and literature, and I read voraciously, and I was a very good writer. So there was a lot that I could contribute. And now I'm very grateful for that job. My husband and I joke that now Massachusetts pays me almost $6,000 a year to not come there anymore. It's a good deal. I like the deal, and they probably did too. So anyway, there I was teaching high school, and as soon as I started to lose some of my weight and feel a little better about myself and feel like I could take care of myself, long before I had recovery in a lot of areas, long before I really calmed down, but in the early years of my abstinence, I started to feel like I had some kind of handle on my life, that I had choices where I saw no choices previously. And really, when I look at the long game, I have prospered and thrived and become more resilient and more self-sufficient and more sensible, and definitely a lot more affluent, and definitely a lot healthier and much thinner and way happier than I was in the years of my active addiction, and even during the early years of my abstinence and sobriety. I was very fortunate because at the same time that I had that Gray Sheet group, where there were people who maybe like had 3 months or 4 months of abstinence more than I did, most of whom are deceased now or relapsed. I had those people for support. That was tough to get support there in those days because everybody had like nerves standing up on end. But I also had an AA group that was one of the oldest groups in the South Shore. And there was a lot of sobriety there. There were a lot of people there with, well, quite a few people anyway, with 30 and 35.
3 minutes left, Nora, 3 minutes left.
Thank you. And 40 years. And so those people were really helpful to me. I can remember I must have been sober and abstinent for maybe a year or two, and this guy, Joe Mack, who was sober for 40 years, said, "Nora, you're a breath of fresh air." And I thought, wow, to this guy, I'm a breath of fresh air. Because most people are like, my husband is still saying, my husband loves me dearly, but he says to me every once in a while, "Nora, I can't find your off button. Where's your off button?" So anyway, apparently that's enough for me since my time is up, but thank you for giving me the opportunity to share. My phone number and contact information are in the chat and also on my name label. Thanks, and I pass.